All right, everyone. Welcome to this first part of a great series where we're going to talk to some of the brightest minds at Microsoft, the cloud solution architects who are doing some really amazing things with customers and building some really interesting solutions. Today, I have Andy Wahrenberger, CSA out of the Austin, Texas area. Andy, really glad to have you here. I also have Matt Calder, who's helped us out a lot getting this series off the ground. Welcome to both of you.
Oh, hi. How you doing?
Matt,
Ooh, thanks for joining us, Andy. Thanks for hosting. Sydney?
Yeah, it's a first session, so it's going to be really fun. Andy, really looking forward to talking to you today. I've heard you've been doing some really interesting stuff around customers working with the Azure platform who have websites that, due to these, I would like to call them unusual times, their websites are getting hit with traffic above and beyond anything they've ever experienced before. And you have some really interesting insight to this. I'd love to hear what your thoughts on and some of the cool things you're doing to help customers out.
Yeah, well, and again, thanks for having me. It's interesting is that there's a lot of different industries, right, that plan for these like pivotal one-time events. Like you think of like a Black Friday or a Boxing Day, Cyber Monday, Singles Day, right? These traditionally shopping events where everyone kind of like queues up on their favorite device and then says, "Hey, I wonder what new goodies are out there." Well, when this this interesting event started happening, right? It fundamentally shifted the way that we interacted with things that traditionally we either didn't interact with or we would go to someplace. If you think of like the governments, right? Different, you have national, regional, state, city, your local school district. Everyone had different information they needed to get to folks about COVID, and then you had other things like think of your grocery stores, your restaurants. Different places that you would just normally like, oh, well, I have my shopping list, I'm going to go out in a car. Well, that stopped, right? And then we started engaging on the internet. And when that happens and you get quote unquote popular on the internet, it can bring some things to bear, right? Sometimes you do really well, right? Sometimes, the ways that you built websites have worked really well, but sometimes, especially if it's unexpected, it doesn't go the best. And then, your team is left there struggling with trying to find different ways, right? Can I scale out? Can I, put more content here and there? Can I, what can I do, right, to satisfy the people that I'm trying to serve this content to? So, yeah, it's interesting. And Azure has a lot of different facilities, to help with this. So, maybe we should take a look at a website. Maybe kind of like take a look at like what would happen if this website got popular, and then maybe the different things that we can do with it using like Front Door and the Azure CDN service. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds really good, Andy. And we're meeting via Teams, so Andy, you can just share your screen. Let's take a look at this really cool website that can show off what you're talking about here.
Right. So. Yeah, and what we'll do here is we'll just bring up kind of a web page on the left hand side, right? And just think of this as a just some commerce site on the internet. Again, these things are very applicable to all different kinds of content, right? So when we talk about a website, right, the first thing we kind of talk about is like the DNS, right? So this is the Contoso Masks website, in the fine tradition of Microsoft and our Contoso brand, right? If you can imagine the story of Contoso Masks, was basically a place that made some interesting masks, probably served parts of some healthcare folks, maybe folks that would go into healthcare facilities to visit family, just some fun things. Then the change happened where everyone needed masks. So Contoso Masks started getting a lot of traffic. So when you look at the site, right, you're thinking, well, okay, so there's a bunch of pictures, right? You can see a bunch of pictures here throughout the site, right? It's probably got some JavaScript. It's probably got some cascading style sheets. So it's a normal site. Now, kind of like how a lot of sites on the internet are born. Right, everything comes from, and let's go ahead and show all the requests here. On the right here, I'm showing what you'll see on the right here is the dev tools, right, for the browser. right? I have the network tab opened up, and you can see all the individual requests that the browser is making for all these individual items. In total, there were 23 different requests where 17 meg were transferred down. And when you start looking at the domain, they're all coming from the same DNS name, www.contosomasks.com. And during normal times, this is great. This is simple, right? It's simple. It's easy. You deploy your website out there and everything kind of works fine. When you start getting popular on the internet, you have to start looking at, how do I shape the traffic so that the valuable traffic's coming to, my application, and the non-value traffic is going somewhere else. And what I mean by valuable, right, is we're talking about dynamic content, right? It's not that the pictures that are illustrated here of the different masks aren't important. It's just that they don't change, right? You're not computing them all the time. So, you're trying to shape that traffic such that only, the important things come to your website. So this is where we start talking about, CDN or content delivery networks, that one of the primary features that a CDN has is they can cache content and geo-distribute content. And, we'll get into a little bit more of the details in a minute, but let's take a little bit more of a look at this website. So you have a bunch of, like I said, a bunch of pictures. And then, a lot of this looks very static. Just for demo purposes here, there's some dynamic information in here. So it means we can't cache. And what I mean by cache, I mean basically take a snapshot somewhere and then serve that up, right? A lot of times, from a web interaction perspective, when a browser attaches to a website, there's some code that's running, which means there's compute that's needed. And the valuable, the dynamic aspects of it, come through and they change. And when you cache things, right, it's super important to know that when you're caching dynamic content, that content's not always for all the people. So you think of like when you log. The other part that's interesting about this website is kind of like a lot of the websites you're using right now. There's a banner, right? There's an ad that says, "Hey, look, there's some interesting messaging here," right? And you click on this, right? And there's a nice little message that says, "Hey, we're all going to get through this." Kind of a normal theme of it's going to be fine, but here's some information about like Contoso masks, right? We're trying to do the best we can. Well, this is also on the same domain, right? So again, this is all going generally to the same spot. And so when customers that I work with, experience this kind of, let's say popularity on the internet, the website starts slowing down. And there's a couple reasons for that. One reason is that, if you have a traditional website set up where it's, a couple of machines, the load balancer or whatnot, there's a certain number of connections that you can take in. And so every person that connects to you is a connection. So if you go from a few connections to 250,000 concurrent connections, like some of the states around the United States, they went even a lot higher. When the different orders went out, what happened to them, right? They start taking lots and lots of traffic, right? Those sites were able to successfully, serve that content because they had planned for it. When you don't plan for it, that's where you have to step in. Because each one of those connections, when they attach to your infrastructure, it takes up some resources that are limited. Unless you have purpose-built hardware that, like some type of a layer 7 routing hardware or a proxy in front of it, there's a finite number of connections that hardware can deal with, right?
Yeah, Andy, that's super interesting because you're talking about content where you had one domain where you have important content that's dynamically served and maybe using really complex application logic, and then static content side by side on the same domain looks like the same website to the customer. Is this a world where we can scale these things independently, where one part of our site could serve hundreds of users and another part of our site could serve millions?
Yes, and that's a great point. I was going to go into the whole connections, but yeah, let's take it up a notch and just talk about like first chunks here, right? Static versus dynamic, right? So the first thing is you look at all these resources, right? So let's clear the log. Let's just refresh the page here. The top part, that's the HTML, right? That's the page that gets all the dynamic content. And then inside of that has all of the different, static contents, right? So the first thing that is fairly straightforward to do, this does involve some minor changes to your code, is you have them served from a small object CDN cache. So in Azure, that's Azure CDN with the Microsoft provider. We also have other providers, but we're going to talk today about the Microsoft provider that you use for general web acceleration. And then so you take all of these files, right? Like the home screen, golf, Minecraft, all these pictures, and you put them into one of our storage accounts, and then you line up a CDN profile. And so we'll go ahead and just kind of look what that looks like here when we browse to it. So again, we'll clear it and we'll refresh the page. And now what happens is, okay, so again, we have the original hit that gets the dynamic content. And now it's serving everything from a cdn.contosomask.com domain. So now that can go to somewhere else. Like you said, it's a static content, right? Now, what that means is that for the 23 requests, instead of 23 going to www, which is your infrastructure, 22 goes to Microsoft's infrastructure for the CDN service, and 1 goes to yours. And what you'll see when you look at your infrastructure is that you have a lot less connections coming in, but then you also now you're making your infrastructure more efficient because you're just worrying about serving up, the individual like dynamic content. So that's the first thing that we can do, right? The second thing, right, is like as a lot of companies and government institutions have these special sites that are meant to message. Like a personal story, I have a child in school, and I was very interested to find out what was going to be happening, because all this happened during our spring break. Is my child going back to school? Are they going to be virtual and this and that? And the school district was publishing out regular interval messages in a regular interval, and there was a website, and they gave us a link to it. I bookmarked it. I refresh that. I refresh that every day. What's going to happen to my child, right? That's not an uncommon thing, right? Maybe I'm a little more obsessive. Maybe not. Other people might have been checking it every hour. But the problem is, right, if whatever that URL, whatever that address is, right, then takes that traffic. So if you look at this example here, right, so Contoso Masks just published it as part of their web page. Right, so that means, right, that all that traffic is coming back to www.contosomask.com. So what we can start doing is, we could rewrite, what we did with the CDN is we went and changed all the images, but changing where that page come from, let's say it's really hard. This is where we start talking about front door. So I had alluded to earlier that the idea of connections, right, is something that can be a challenge at scale, right, for traditional infrastructure, right? Something like front door, which is another part of the CDN family at Microsoft, is our dynamic site acceleration offering. And what that means is that all the Azure data centers and the points of presence, the basically small network locations we have all around the planet, there's about 160 of them, can become basically the front door to your website. And what that, without going into a lot of the details, think of it as wherever you're at in the world, when you type in an address, right, it's going to start sending you somewhere. Now you can choose to have the public internet send you from wherever you're at to wherever the infrastructure is. The public internet, it's really robust. It's public. It's in essence, it's free based on your connectivity, but then there's a lot of variability when it comes to how long it takes for you to get from point A to point B, and the further geographically dispersed that you are, the more infrastructure that is it is controlled by various different people perform. Where a front door comes in and dynamic site acceleration is think of it as like red carpet pathing for your website. So instead of you going from, let's say you're in Munich, and then you're coming to, let's say, the center of the United States, instead of going, through basically, Germany to France to then hit one of the transatlantic lines over and then all the way through the United States, you would get directed to the closest Microsoft point of presence, and they get on the Azure Backbone. Now, the Azure Backbone it's a completely private network around the planet. We have I think last time I heard we are the second largest telecom by the amount of cable we run around the planet. Right? We have a very robust, fast, low latency network around the planet. So your request goes from Munich to the local point of presence in Germany. It goes on our our network backplane, which we have published SLAs for, and then gets to the closest part to your site and then enters there. Right. So what also happens then is that as people are hitting your site from all over the world, now all those individual connections are hitting the Microsoft infrastructure. And what's so important about this is that then each of those points open up static or persistent connections from the points of presence to your origin. So then you start seeing a much smaller load or a number of connections individually hitting your website because it's being proxied and managed by our infrastructure. So let's take a look at what happens to Contoso, right? And we're going to turn off the CDN for this. We're just going to hit it through front door here. Again, it's going to come up. It's going to it's going to be your site because it's basically just taking a different way through the internet. But now what gets really fascinating is that now we have the ability to control things in front of your website, in front of your code. Right. So just a couple little details here, right? This one here is really interesting. What front door will do is it will inject some headers into the requests that allow you to whitelist traffic coming in. So as front door becomes the front part of the infrastructure for your website, you can restrict access to your website to only let front door hit you. And then you can also further restrict to make sure that only your front door is hitting your website. And that's what this one header down here will tell you, right? It will say, hey, this is the front door account that's hitting you. Can I come in or not? And then there are some simple techniques you can use to filter that out. So now with front door, this is going all around the world. It's accepting traffic all around the world on this DNS name and then forwards to your request. Now, because we're in essence proxying all of the traffic, that means this link up here we can control and do something different. So when I click on this right now, right, this is just set up just like the website that the one without front door, and so it goes just to the message portion of our of our website here, and that's going to front door contosomass.com/messages, which means that's hitting us on www.contosomass.com/messages on the backside. That's not ideal, right? We told customers we really like to go to a static spot for for these messages, but we linked it and it was hard for us to figure out how to get them there. So by being on front door, we're going to use a different domain name here, say with redirect, right? So we have a different front door setup that has a special routing rule. So when I click on this, even though the browser is going to say go to front door with redirect.com, contosomass.com/message, it's going to issue a redirect over to message.contosomass.com. So why that's important is Microsoft, you can see here on the waterfall kind of tells you about how fast, or how much effort's happening, right? So this right here comes back with a redirect, a 302 redirect. So front door redirects you over to a static site, messages.contosomass.com, which as you're looking through the CDN examples, there's some great examples on how to publish pure static content websites to our storage accounts. This allows you to then push it in a completely different area have completely different caching rules, right? And then specially purpose this so that it's super easy for you to update and then get your message out there. But then that's not hitting www. So then when you have other folks that are trying to shop and buy and do other things, or get deeper into your applications, whatever those are doing, right? You're now shaping that traffic over there, right? This is all, the whole purpose of all this is to say, how can I know I'm going to have all these people hit me, right? We're going to hit my website. How can I get all that traffic into different spots that have different scaling or can cache differently to be more effective, both financially and also from a performance perspective, right? So lots of fun things that we can do here. So I'm going to pause there for a second and just see how we're doing, right? Do we want to see how a front door is put together, or maybe how this is configured?
Yes, I'll definitely be interested in seeing how this is configured. As a developer myself, as a developer, I do a lot of work with ASP.NET Blazor, where I have a ton of static content. I may have a dynamic API, and then my Blazor code itself may be hosted somewhere else. And so a lot of these scenarios you showed are very interesting, and I definitely will want to see how this is configured. I know we're going to be very brief here, but this is just really compelling content. I don't want to stop yet.
Okay, well, let's. So we're gonna go. So we're gonna do is let's go take a look at the Azure Portal, and then we're gonna go over to. So I use the Portal app, which is really fun to use, and we're gonna go look at Contoso masks. Okay, so Contoso masks, right? It's a front door account. And the account itself is a wrapper, like a lot of the resources in Azure, that gives you a control plane for giving people access to manage. You can have lots of DNS names or lots of websites in a single account. There are a couple of things like, basically like the logging and some of the other items that get kind of interesting when you talk about like, do I have one account or many accounts? But in the end, a front door, account, and I clicked on the designer here, you set up a front end, a back end pool, and then routing rules. The front end is what's the new name, right? Or what's the name people are going to access. A back end pool is where is the content, right? And the routing rules are how do I get there, right? When do I send what requests to where, all right? When you create a front door, you're going to get an Azure FD.net address, right? So this is a DNS entry on one of Microsoft's domains. It allows you to test and do some things with it, right? But this becomes the basis of setting one of these up. When you're done, you're going to be doing a CNAME, basically it's an alias inside of DNS, where you're going to point one of your websites to this address. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. So you have a front end. Front ends are really simple. Do you want to enable a web application firewall? These things are fun. They allow you to keep some of the we'll just say more interesting traffic out of your website. You can do a lot of things with a WAF. But again, so if you're familiar, if you're interested, we have a lot of good articles about WAFs, but in general, it's a web application firewall. Session affinity allows you to say, hey, when a user comes in, do I want to go to a particular backend all the time, or do I want to let them bounce around based on my rules? So once you set up a front end host, the next thing you do is you define the backend hosts. And so I have my host as an app service, right? So we make it really easy for you to pick a lot of the Azure native things that host the website. Super easy also to say, this is my custom DNS name or my IP address where my content is. Somewhat overlooked fact, you can use front door against things that are on premise. You don't have to use it just in Azure. But this is where you can specify one or many backends. You have to tell front door, how do I know if that backend is up and running? And then you can do some fun things with load balancing. Once you define a backend pool, then this is where you start creating, how do I get to my content? So one of the more popular things to do is, I only want secure traffic to my website. So I'm going to create a routing rule in front door that says anything that comes in on HTTP, and this is where you can pick which one of the DNS names, and I'll get into the custom ones here in a minute. You can pick which front ends it applies to. You can match based on the path, and that, so if you think of like www.contosomass.com/messages, right? The slash part, like /users or whatever that's going to be. And then you can pick a choice of forwarding or redirecting. In this case, we want to make sure any HTTP requests become HTTPS. Click a button. It's going to default to found. You want to redirect to the HTTPS. And just say, look, keep everything else that was in the browser, right? So maybe you have deep links in your application. Maybe someone, like I said before, maybe someone has saved that link to see what the update from the school system is, and it's on a deep link. It preserves it, does the redirect for you, and it goes to and it's at the edge, meaning in the Microsoft's infrastructure, not even touching your site. The next one, just real quick, we're going to say, hey, so if HTTPS comes in for anything, we want you to route it to the backend pool, right? So forwarding is send it to my origin, send it to my location. I use the word origin. Origin is a general CDN term, right? It's like, where is my content? That is the origin of your CDN service. So in total, without the custom domains, it takes a couple minutes to set this up. It does take 10 or 15 minutes at most, probably a little bit less, to get the front door published and worldwide available. A lot of times it's a lot faster, but you want to give this a couple minutes to kind of percolate. When you start getting into custom domains, you see I have 3 in here, right? So let's just look at front door. This is where contosomass.com. So that's like my DNS. I need to create a name for it, right? So a lot of times you're moving an existing site to front door. So we're using another one here just as a demo. But imagine this is www.contosomass.com. This is where, to speed up the process, there's a little tutorial that they have a link for up here that we have. Click on that. It talks about some simple verification records. You put it in, it makes it much smoother, right? You don't have to worry about going back and forth and waiting for DNS updates. That's the longest period that you have when you set one of these up, is setting that DNS up. Great instructions here. Also, when you have custom domains, we will generate for free valid SSL certificates, and we will auto renew them. We'll manage them. It's a great benefit, right? You don't have to manage all that. You're just like, I want to secure my site. Click a button. It takes a little bit of time. Maybe again, you're in the orders of a couple, like 5, 10, 15 minutes for an SSL cert to be generated and then distributed around the planet. It can happen faster. But again, this is a little bit of pre-planning on DNS. And again, there's another helpful link right here. You do that, you can be up and running in under half an hour, soup to nuts. You can also, quickly enable the WAF too. WAFs are a lot easier to enable. I will caution when you start playing with this, you want to test it. Put it in the learning or the documentation or logging mode to make sure that the rules aren't being enforced right away. It's in it's called detection in the front door terms. Put in detection mode so you can watch the logs and not block traffic. A lot of the rules can get aggressive. The WAF policies will start blocking things if you're not careful. Anyway,
Andy, I was going to say, this is a great point to kind of wrap things up and get some of your closing thoughts. You showed us how we can get a really compelling solution together in less than a half an hour. In a half an hour, you showed us how we can make our solutions better in a half an hour. So I thought it was pretty relevant. So really interested in looking at the load testing and getting your final thoughts on everything.
Yeah, and just to bring this all back up, right? We've been talking about hey, it's great to put front door in, and there's a lot of things, but I wanted to show just some numbers, right, for some of the testing that we did specifically with this solution. There's a lot of things you can do with your app to make it run faster, right? You can add more hardware, and you can do some caching and some other things. There's some things that you can't control, and this is where Front Door really, really helps. It's really the initial connection and the TLS handshaking, right? So we did a test where this website's located in the central part of the United States. We did it from Australia, South, basically India, Europe, and the west part of the United States. As you can see, right, you have the front door numbers in the bottom, the origin ones on the top. You start looking at the TLS handshaking, right? You start looking at it's taking 400 milliseconds for a browser to establish and do the entire back and forth handshaking process to establish a secure connection, right? This is the one where, from a pure performance perspective, this is where you see the benefit. And there's very little that you can do from an application side to make this better. You don't want to turn off SSL. That's not the right answer. I've had that question before. I'm like, well, I mean, yeah, you could take brakes out of a car and that makes you go faster too, but you don't want to do that either. So you look at like the connecting and the TLS handshaking, right? Now, sometimes it takes a little bit more, sometimes, right? Europe, it's apparently really fast to connect to the central part of the United States, and it can take more. But when you look at the overall numbers, right, it cut off half of the entire request without changing your code. So just to kind of like sum up the thoughts here, right? Dealing with large amounts of web traffic when you don't expect it, it's kind of like any other surprise, right? Some surprises are good, surprises are bad. It's great that people are coming to your site, but then it starts getting to that uncomfortable part where you start losing that quality of service. There's a few things that you can do with some of the Azure services that make it a lot easier to absorb, right? There's only so much you can do with infrastructure. Sometimes you have to go on the stuff in the front, and that's where Front Door and CDN can really help you out.
Well, Andy, thank you so much for sharing your insight. Again, really compelling demos, really compelling conversation. We have a link at the bottom of your screen, msusdev at Microsoft.com. If you got questions, want to get a little bit more insight or dig into this, you're always free to email us. If you got ideas for future talks, feel free to email us. Andy and Matt, thank you both so much for all your time today. And we look forward to the next talk in a couple of weeks.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Andy. That was great.